And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmie Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmie at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmie at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmie at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmie gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmie at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmie, what you got? Policy and markets, elections, current events. The broadcast master shows us how to win. I said, policy and markets, elections and current events. The broadcast master shows us how to win. I got Jimmie at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Gonna talk markets, gonna talk politics, great for the generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Got cash money, talking politics, great for generations. Oh, what a mix. I got Jimmie at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmie at the Crossroads. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. As always, getting started a little late, but the fun never goes away, and we are here ready to rock and roll. Thanks so much for joining us, being a part of the program. I am Jimmie Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. If you have not done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the Jimmie at the Crossroads YouTube channel at youtube.com/Jimmie at the Crossroads. Also, like us on Facebook, Jimmie Sengenberger Media Personality. Follow our partners at the Washington Examiner as well. They're on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And of course, if you want to join into the festivities, you can do so by tweeting at me, at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. This is the show that brings you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you. Coming up in just a little bit, we will be joined by Jeffrey Tucker, who is the editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research, more of an Austrian economics outfit. And we're going to talk with him about the pandemics of the 1950s and 1960s that each killed over 100,000 Americans. We're going to delve into that discussion, what lessons we can learn from then and what lessons we can learn from then for today with the current pandemic that we are now facing. But so great to be with you here on today's show with Jeffrey Tucker and also with Max McGuire of conservative-daily.com, where he is Advocacy Director and also the host of the Conservative Daily podcast. We will talk with Max about a new story of Democrats deploying purportedly U.S. government-funded AI, artificial intelligence technology, in the 2020 election in order to support Joe Biden. What? We will talk about that with Max McGuire, plus the ongoing saga of General Michael Flynn. And in just a matter of moments as well, we will be joined by a good friend, our main go-to guy for some of these fun bits, the intro announcer and more, Jimmie Viles, Jimmy with an IE, will rejoin us with sort of a retrospective look at the Simpsons and politics. Looking forward to having Jimmie Viles back on the show here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk a little bit about economic-related topics right now. Cut 4. Warren Buffett, of course, is the noted billionaire investor extraordinaire. And he had some thoughts yesterday at, I think this was his big quarterly meeting of Berkshire Hathaway shareholders on the trajectory of the economy and some of the things he's keeping in mind. I think it provides some interesting insights to comment on. Take a listen. Warren Buffett yesterday.
The operating earnings for the first quarter have no meaning whatsoever in terms of forecasting what's going to happen the next year. And I don't know the consequences of shutting down the American economy. I know eventually it will work, whatever we do. We may make mistakes. We will make mistakes, and I'm not, during this talk, and later on, I'm not going to be second-guessing people on this because nobody knows for sure what any alternative action would produce or anything of the sort. But what we do know is that for some period, certainly during the balance of the year, but it could go on a considerable period of time, who knows. But our operating earnings will be less, considerably less, than if the virus hadn't come along. I mean, it hurts some of our businesses a lot. I mean, you shut down. Some of our businesses have effectively been shut down. It affects others much less. Our three major businesses of insurance and the BNSF Railroad, and our energy business, those are our three largest by some margin. They're in a reasonably decent position. They'll spend more than their depreciation. So some of the earnings will go, along with depreciation, will go toward increasing fixed assets. But basically, these businesses will produce cash even though their earnings
So not the most
somewhat.
exciting gentleman, Warren Buffett, but the fact that he is so concerned. I mean, they had a loss for their last quarter, as I recall. His company, Berkshire Hathaway, has ownership of so many different sectors. And just to hear him talk about the uncertainty over the economy and uncertainty about his thoughts on where things are headed, I think is notable, because this is a guy who is pretty darn prescient. And it's important for us all to just kind of listen to those who understand so many of these different dynamics, how businesses are functioning. Gives us an idea of what we might be looking for as far as the trajectory of the economy and trajectory of major and small companies. Now let's go to cut 6. This is Nancy Pelosi being asked, Speaker of the House, of course, being asked to respond to President Trump's push for a payroll tax cut. And you have to listen to how she frames this answer.
You know, they want bailouts for the states, the Democrats, and really it's a number of states that frankly have not been managed well by Democrats over a long period of time. So we have to be very careful about that. Very careful. But we will be doing infrastructure. And I told Steve just today, we're not doing anything unless we get a payroll tax cut.
So
You know
is a payroll tax cut okay from your point of view,
No,
or is it
it's
a
not.
non-starter?
No, it is not.
And if it
It
is a
is not.
non-starter, Madam Speaker, why is a payroll tax cut a non-starter?
First of all, this is all to be related to the coronavirus. We have enormous cost. Much of it incurred because the president was in denial early on, delayed a reaction to it, caused deaths. And so now we want to say, okay, that was then. All right, let's start now and do things in a positive way. Nobody's putting anything on the table and saying, unless we have this, we're not doing that. He shouldn't either. But apart from that, look at him saying these states want to be bailed out. The state they used as an example was Illinois, which got into fiscal problems because of a Republican governor who was governor there until Governor Pritzker has come to pull it out. So we're talking about life and death. We're talking about people dying. We're talking about people risking their lives to save people's lives. They're not talking about red state, blue state. We're talking about all America.
But what's wrong with the payroll tax cut?
What's right with we have $500 billion for state, 250, maybe 300 billion for local. This is a way for us. This is a way for us to address the situation. There are other things: direct payment, unemployment insurance. Issues like PPP, there's a great deal of money that is being put out there in a way that helps businesses stay open, but not only that, let them have customers when they're open. So this is something that has been, we didn't just start this bill yesterday. This bill was what we were in the works with CARES 1. They did 150 for state and local. It wasn't enough. We're continuing that. And we did testing in our first bill March 4th and then testing last week, but we need more for that.
So if the president says,
Madam
Speaker,
well, she didn't even give an answer. He was asked, well, why not a payroll tax? And she just went off on a rambling response saying some things that they would have liked to see, I guess, but not anything, it seemed, about what was her reasoning behind not wanting a payroll tax cut. Now, I don't believe that the payroll tax cut is an end-all and be-all, but I don't think it hurts. There are a lot of businesses who are struggling to keep the doors open right now, but are keeping their doors open, and this would definitely help them. Now, the end-all and be-all, no, but it would be a good positive development, I think, for many businesses across the country and workers across the country who are not set aside entirely by this crisis, because they are being adversely affected. Put some more money, allows them to keep more money. I was going to say put some more money in their pocket, but it allows them to keep more of the money that's supposed to go into their pocket. Because keep in mind that tax revenue to the government is our money first. It's the money of the people first. But Nancy Pelosi, and let's put her up on the screen here. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, is doing everything she can to sort of weasel her way out of a discussion on this. She doesn't have an explanation for why she opposes the idea of a payroll tax cut, except probably because it's something that would dramatically help the people in a way that would potentially be ascribed to Republicans because it is Trump's big idea that he has been touting. They didn't go with it before. They should go with it now. I think not because it's the end-all and be-all, but because it allows Americans to keep more of their hard-earned money, allows businesses to keep more capital on hand instead of having to pay their percentage of the payroll tax for their employees. And then also, it's just always a good thing when people get to keep more of their money and the government gets less money in their hands. Now, I understand payroll taxes go in supposedly to the trust funds for Social Security and Medicare. The reality is that those are so far gone and deeply depleted that suspending the payroll tax for 9 months when we're already seeing a slowed down economy is not going to make a dramatic difference in terms of the revenue into the Social Security system, in terms of revenue into the Medicare system. It will help those people who are struggling to get by. And that is the crux of what we're dealing with here. And we must do what we can to help invigorate, well, I don't know about invigorate the economy when it's being shut down still in most places, but at least provide relief. And tax relief, especially payroll tax relief, is the most significant sort of injection of relief that you can provide. So her non-answer was just that, a non-answer. All right, rather than taking a video break, I want to play a clip here. You have seen this before, and then we will get on our guest. This is the video of Arnold Schwarzenegger meeting with President Donald Trump in one of our funny video break bits, featuring our first guest of the day. Take a look at this.
Safe, unsafe. Very safe, completely unsafe. Extremely insanely safe. X Games, unsafe. Who's there? What do you want?
It's me, Arnold. Don Trump, I need to ask you a favor. I need you to stop using my quotes and my movie titles in your speeches. When you talk to the public, it gives them the wrong idea that somehow I support you.
I can do whatever I want. I am, after all, Commander-in-Chief.
Ah, that's what I mean right there. You can't just blatantly rip people off. That is a movie that I was in, not you, me.
I can do as I wish, as I totally recall.
See what I mean? That was a great movie I did with Jamie Lee Curtis and James Cameron, and neither one of those two support you, and now you're using that. You can't keep on doing this.
That's
exactly
the media true lie right there.
That's what I mean. You can't say that.
I don't know. Whatever became of us, Arnold? We used to be like brothers, like twins.
That's the last straw. I can't take it anymore. There's something wrong with you. You must have something in your brain.
It's not a tumor.
Ah, that's it. That's it. That's from Kindergarten Cop. You can't steal that.
You know what? You're fired.
You can't fire me. I don't work for you anymore. I quit.
I want you to get Pence on the line right away, Mike Pence. We're going to send him down to Mar-a-Lago, and we're going to put a stop to this Arnold business. Tell him to run. Go. Get to the chopper.
I heard that. Knock it off now, or I'll be back. Unlike you in 2020, I'll be back.
Get him out.
Oh, gotta love a good little satire. We are here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Yours truly, Jimmie Sengenberger, sitting in the chair as per usual. Trying to do our best to make sense out of nonsense, but sometimes we welcome the nonsense. Indeed, we embrace it. And that's why I'm so pleased to welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads the man who you saw in that video as Arnold Schwarzenegger, as well as in most of our video break videos that have some humorous bent to them, even the audio-only ones with imagery and then the audio that you hear. Jimmie Viles, Jimmy with an IE, entertainer and voice actor extraordinaire. Welcome, brother, back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. How you doing?
Is this Jimmy Mushroomberger?
Yes, Mr. President, except it's Sengenberger.
No, it's George. It's George.
No, my last name is Sengenberger. I'm Jimmie Sengenberger.
Oh, Johnny Sengenberger.
No, Jimmy.
Who's this Johnny fella?
There is no Johnny, Mr. President. Ah.
Uh-oh. Well, where am I going to go to the bathroom? That's a little joke.
Jimmie Viles, Jimmy with an IE, George W. Bush. I don't know who's here.
Jimmy Sengenberger. You, sir. How are you?
You know, I'm doing all right. It's been a crazy morning, and it's about to get even crazier having you on, my friend. How the heck are you?
Well, I'm anxious. I'm done getting my politics from the news. I'm getting all my politics from the Simpsons from now on. That's it.
From the Simpsons?
Oh yeah, that's the best political voice on the planet because it's non-biased and it's freakily funny and that's why the extreme right hates him and the extreme left hates him. They are biting.
Now, please tell me, IE, that you'll also get your politics from Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Well, I get my sense out of nonsense from Jimmy at the Crossroads.
That's true. That's very true. So, all right. Well, I wanted to have you on. You mentioned The Simpsons. Now, The Simpsons absolutely are so great about politics and how they do it. They're very clever. They've made some uncanny predictions and more. So tell us sort of your overarching view as someone who can do I don't even know how many characters, but a ton of characters from The Simpsons as far as their voices. What do you think of the way that they approach politics? Because as you said, people on both sides can get irritated with The Simpsons.
I think that they take a view where nothing is held back. For instance, one time King and Kodos, two aliens, took over Clinton and Dole. And Bob Dole's not going to like this. And they had a great Bob Dole, and they had a great Bill Clinton on there. And Clinton and Dole were captured by aliens, and then they were now campaigning for president. What are you going to do? You have to vote for one of us. It's a two-party system. And as Bill Clinton, abortions for all. And the crowd goes, boo! Very well. Abortions for a select few. Boo! Very well. Abortions for none. Boo! So you can't win.
Sort of like pointing out the indecisiveness on a variety of topics of the American people.
The hypocrisy. And that's how I feel about the whole thing in general. I like to point out the hypocrisy. Homer, on the Second Amendment, I can't help it, Marge. When I had that gun in my hand, I felt like God must feel when he has a gun. You can't say that, but it's biting. that hits home.
Well, and one thing with Homer, by the way, years ago we had a bit called Jomer Biden, and this was when Biden was vice president of the United States, and we would just take different sayings, even then, that he would say, and give him a Biden voice, and you're like, no, he actually said that line.
Yeah, Homer. Oh, he would be the perfect Jomer Biden, and then Jomer Biden came out, and you can't really parody something that's funnier when it comes right out of his mouth. Jeez.
That's true.
I love it. I'm running for the office of the vice president of South America, and you're like, what? That's just something Homer would say. That's why we chose Jomer Biden. Those were the days, huh, Jimbo?
You got to give me a dough. You got to give me a dough.
Dough, stupid.
So now, speaking of the stupid Republicans, Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns had that infamous meeting with the Republican National Committee where they were just poking at the idea of, the rich Republicans.
Inside a castle. And it was inside a castle. So they come in, and there's a fireplace, and Mr. Burns is telling it to order. And there's the rich Texan. Yee-haw! Shooting his guns. And at the table is Count Dracula. And what we need to do is stop those liberals. Blah, blah. And then they show Krusty the Clown.
Oh, what a day. I'm all for getting rid of those Vakaka liberals. They're telling me I can't use Mr. Teeny in my act anymore. Damn PETA.
Well, so, Smithers, what evil can we perpetrate on the country today?
See, what I love... I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to say what I love is that when you get going on The Simpsons, you just do one voice rolling into another, rolling into the other, and it just suddenly it takes on a life of its own. How in the world do you do that, Jimmie Viles, entertainer extraordinaire, jumping from one voice to another?
I don't know, but I bet it's because I drink some Magic Pixie juice. Hey, Homer, let's have cheese omelets. Are you nuts? We got to find my daughter. I don't know, Homer. I use 3 kinds of cheese. I don't know how I do it. You can't explain it.
Sure.
I think out of my gift for mimicry was born from Monty Python's Flying Circus, from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and I memorized that movie. And it seems like where Dennis, speaking of politics, Dennis is down in the field, and King Arthur's arguing politics with him. I told you, it was a narco-syndicus commune. We take an intense act of the executive officer of the week, and all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting. Dennis, there's some lovely things down here. Who are you? I'm Arthur, King of the Britons. Who are the Britons? We all are. We're all Britons, and I'm your king. I didn't vote for you. You don't vote for kings. Well, if you become king then. Look, strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical aquatic ceremony. Be quiet. Oh, who do you think you are? I'm your king. You know. So that's how I learned. That's how I learned to do it. Just memorizing those things.
But here
I
have to say that what you just did on a political show was perfect. That's the portion, the most significant portion of Monty Python and the Holy Grail when it comes to what we're dealing with in terms of politics and consent to the governed and the crises we're facing and the power structure in our society. It seems like we've been electing people, but electing governors as kings in many circumstances. But I don't want to get off on that train. I have one more question for you before we let you go. Jimmie Viles, our guest. Of course, he is the announcer at the start of the show and our main go-to guy for so many of our video breaks here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And that is in terms of The Simpsons. One other thing that The Simpsons has really done is they've been able to predict uncannily so many different things. What do you think? Yes. How do they have that knack for it? And is there one, just briefly, is there one prediction that comes to mind more than any others?
Yeah, Lisa Simpson in an episode in the future was elected. She was the president, and Bart was still a bum, and Bart was going to be elected the minister for keeping it real. And if this was before the Me Too movement, this was before anybody had ever heard the words Gen X, Gen Y. This was in 1992, maybe.
Wow.
And Lisa Simpson says, I'm happy to be the first straight female president. And that wasn't a prediction, but she said, and now I can fix all of the mess that President Trump made. And wow, I saw that the other day. Oh, man.
Wow, that's uncanny.
That was really cool.
Wow. Well,
and
yeah.
And Krusty's predicted things before. Rock the Vote. They've done stuff on Rock the Vote. They've done so many political issues.
Heck, in the Simpsons movie, they predicted Tom Hanks being quarantined. I mean, my goodness, that was
yes,
that was something
yes.
too. So, but we got to run.
Oh, great! Oh, now I'm stuck here on an island forever. Oh, and I can't come home. Come on, people, let's get this country opened up again. I've got another movie to do.
Jimmie Viles, voice man and entertainer extraordinaire, always great. You never know what's going to happen when we bring Jimmie Viles on as yourself and not just as characters. Thanks for joining us, my friend. Jimitations.com. Check it out. You stay well and healthy.
Everyone out there, always look on the bright side of life.
Thank you. Jimmie Viles, again, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thank you, my friend. We're going to take a break. We're overdue for one. When we come back, Jeffrey Tucker, who is editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research, is going to join us, and we will dive in to a topic that I didn't know about until I saw his article on the 1968-69 pandemic. We've had pandemics in this country within the last 60 years. Less than that killed over 100,000 Americans at a time. We got to talk about that. We'll dive in when we return here on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We all have rules we have to follow. But what if you could have a direct hand in helping to write the rules that would impact your life or your business? I'm Jimmie Sengenberger, and let's talk about exactly that. There's a lot of talk these days about the Trump administration's efforts to deregulate the American economy. If you think about it, though, deregulation is actually a great thing because it unleashes the unlimited potential of each and every individual. But in a lot of cases, you actually find folks advocating for more regulation, and frequently those people are the ones who will benefit most from the regulation, such as big businesses like Facebook or General Motors that, if you put in more regulation, would be able to cut out the competition or directly benefit them. For example, putting up higher barriers to entry so that next small business, the next Mark Zuckerberg, won't really be able to get in on some of the action, some of the incredible opportunities. For example, last year we had the data privacy scandals for Facebook. Well, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, went before Congress and testified before a Senate committee.
I think the real question, as the internet becomes more important in people's lives, is what is the right regulation, not whether there should be or
But you
not.
as a company welcome regulation?
I think if it's the right regulation, then yes.
You think the Europeans have it right? So would you work with us in terms of what regulations you think are necessary in your industry?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you submit to us some proposed regulations?
Yes, and I'll have my team follow up with you so that way we can have this discussion across the different categories where I think that this discussion needs to happen.
Look forward to it.
Now, what did you notice in this video? You had CEO Mark Zuckerberg say that he supports the right regulation, and a United States senator actually asked him to provide some sample regulations to potentially help write the regulations. Big businesses tend to support more regulation because it hurts their upstart competitors, say the next Mark Zuckerberg. That's why General Motors CEO Mary Barra has been advocating for a brand new effort to regulate in advance of the interests of battery-powered cars, which makes perfect sense because Mary Barra has actually begun moving forward with GM toward an electric-only future. So what you have here are big businesses having seats at the table day in and day out to help increase regulations to the disadvantage of smaller competitors. That's a case for less regulation, not more. And it's a message we can get across to millennials today, who are the most innovative generation, perhaps in history. That is a message we need to get across as well. So let's boldly proclaim it.
And ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome back to the set your host of Jimmie at the Crossroads, Jimmie Sengenberger.
Welcome back to Jimmie at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Getting serious now, although my thanks to entertainer, voice actor Jimmie Viles for returning to the show for some lighter flair conversation to kick things off. Good to be with you on the show that brings engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, on the issues that matter most today, to your bottom line, to the country, to the world. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you. If you have not subscribed already to the YouTube channel, please do. youtube.com/Jimmie at the Crossroads. So right now in this country, everybody knows this, we're facing a pandemic that has now killed nearly 70,000 Americans. The novel coronavirus, COVID-19. But this is not the first pandemic to kill tens of thousands of Americans within not just the last 100 years, but within the last 50 years or so. My next guest today here on Jimmie at the Crossroads has been highlighting a couple of different pandemics that we've faced in the last several decades, including one during which Woodstock took place that took American lives numbering at about 100,000. Jeffrey Tucker is editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research, and he joins us now here on Jimmie at the Crossroads. Jeffrey, welcome to the show, sir. It's such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. So let me just ask you a question. What got you at this point to highlight a couple of pandemics that we first the 1968-69 pandemic, the Hong Kong flu, and then also the one from the 50s, which was the Asian flu, because you're highlighting these right now, but I don't hear politicians or the media talking about either of them.
Well, we act like this is the first pandemic we've ever had, and that's not true. I mean, there's, my own mother remembers 1968 very well, and she was a little girl in 1957, where there was another pandemic. The second one killed 100,000 Americans. The first one killed 116,000. They were terrible pandemics, actually. And what's striking about it is I just wanted to know, like, what's the difference between then and now? And what I found is that the New York Times, had one article in 1957 about the 57 pandemic that killed 116,000 Americans back when we used to live 10 years younger, fewer than we live today, and there was no obesity and far less diabetes and heart disease and so on. So we were younger, so it's arguably a higher death rate than what we'll experience with COVID-19. And they just had a different approach to it. And what the New York Times counseled in those days was calm, trust medical science, go about your business, and go to the doctor if you're sick, isolate yourself if you're sick, if you're feeling symptoms, and if you're not, let's get through this, and immunity will happen over time. That's what they said in 57 and in 68. And what's striking about this is, as far as I could tell, there wasn't a single closure of a single school in either case. The theater stayed open, the restaurants, the bars, as you mentioned, Woodstock happened. Elvis was king in 1957, Ike was president. There were no cancellations of anything. Now, I have, and after we get off the phone here, and I have another interview shortly, I'm going to update the article because I have a friend of mine who said that the 1957 Latter-day Saints National Convention was canceled in light of the 57 flu. Now that's very interesting to me, because what it shows is that people were not ignorant that there was a pandemic. It wasn't like they were stupid. Is that they were intelligent and approached it with medical science in mind, and not this medieval attitude that we've adopted this year, which is run from the virus and hide, and it'll go back to China.
Well, one thing, though, is that the media today is saying listen to medical science. But it appears that the scientists that we're listening to, for example, Dr. Fauci, are the ones most prominently who say you need to shelter in place. We need to have these sort of stay-at-home orders. It seems to me that there's been a change in the way in which government approaches these things, the way in which scientists approach these sorts of dynamics and pandemics, and the way in which the media does. I think the media, in part, it's a 24/7 news cycle. We have social media now perpetuating a lot of these things, but also when it comes to scientists, there is a little bit more of an emphasis on sort of the stature of listening to scientists and saying, oh, they know what they're talking about on these particular issues. And those scientists are calling for more government involvement. The media tends to be on board with increased government involvement. So tease out a little bit more, Jeffrey Tucker, what you notice are some of the key differences and maybe why we're seeing some of these differences.
Well, what we found, I think we all know this now, is that there's not just one opinion of science. There's Dr. Fauci hasn't practiced medicine in 25 years, actually, and it was he who in late March said this is a rather mild flu and we should just go about our business. So he wrote this in the New England Journal of Medicine, and then he changed his mind. So he's been flip-flopping all over the place, I think, as you know. And there are epidemiologists who have different views. They talk about herd immunity. This term herd immunity, which is kind of an offensive term to think of people as a herd, but it wasn't even batted around the public press until something like 2 weeks after the lockdowns happened. And the concept is that, exactly as my mother would tell you, that the non-vulnerable populations need to get the disease and the vulnerable populations need to isolate, and that's how we get rid of viruses, not through vaccines as such, but rather through dealing with them and integrating them into our lives. That was the attitude in 1968 and 1957. They were very infused with this post-war attitude that they had figured viruses out, and they were going to deal with them. And I think there must have been some lost knowledge between 1968 and the present. However, I must say, at the American Institute for Economic Research, we've been running many interviews with epidemiologists and virologists and biostatisticians and so on that do talk in great detail about the ineffectiveness of lockdowns and how there's no statistical relationship whatsoever between infection rates and death rates and the lockdowns. And they're talking about the Sweden case, where they did choose this herd immunity strategy, and they didn't destroy their economies. They didn't violate human rights. They didn't crush everybody's liberties or ability to go out. They just, dealt with the virus as a virus and tried to. They didn't cancel school. The idea is that you spread it among the non-vulnerable populations, which are mostly children. Not in this case, I think we know this already by now, that there's a demographic element to the infection and the fatality rate. And this one particularly affects, as we've seen, people in nursing homes. People, the age of 70 seems to be the crossing point at which it becomes actually dangerous for you, especially if you have comorbidities. But underneath that, if you're healthy, it's not fatal, and there's almost zero really rate of death for children under 16, which is why Sweden let the schools go on and so on. Anyway, I guess my point is that in the past, we chose freedom as a way to deal with these pandemics, even though we knew they were there. I think sometimes people are reading my articles about these past pandemics and thought, well, those people were ignorant. They didn't know, but that's not true. There was widespread knowledge that the pandemic was here, but they chose to comply with the Constitution, to obey human rights, follow the good science, and deal with them, and not believe, as we apparently do, that you can control a virus through politics.
Well, I mean, Jeffrey Tucker, I want to jump in here because, and again, we're talking with Jeffrey Tucker, who's editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research. One of the most interesting points that you've raised, both in your writings on this topic and then also in our conversation right now, is the notion that we didn't back then look to the government to do these sorts of lockdowns and empower new authorities to those sorts of figures. What do you think has changed in the last several decades that has made Americans acquiesce more to growing government authority and the idea of empowering individual governors with the ability to shut down single-handedly with the stroke of a pen their state economies and force people to engage in activities like wearing masks or other things with social distancing or to stay at home, with it taking a while for Americans to start, and still I think a smaller proportion, to start really pushing back?
Yeah, I think really the problem is that, we're going to be talking about this for 10 years. Why do we pursue political solutions to a medical problem? And I think you'll have to come down to a couple of very interesting possibilities. One is the 24-hour news cycle, where media has to have constant eyes on you. So that means that incentivizes them to be as alarmist as possible just to get you panicked and get you watching. So there has to be a constant stream of news, and there's thousands of these stations now. So things like hurricanes or diseases or whatever the latest thing is become great fodder for getting eyes on them. And this is a perfect case. So, back in early March, you started seeing this kind of frenzy developing, even from some of my favorite venues like the New York Times. They started warning us about the coming mass death. So that's one factor. It's just the role of the media. And I like media and I like 24-hour news and so on. But I think in this case, it really did feed a kind of public frenzy. So that's one factor. The second factor is the role of predictive epidemiology. Neil Ferguson from the Imperial College of London persuaded the UK government to go from a relatively benign, herd immunity strategy to one of full lockdown. And because of his prediction of 500,000 deaths in the UK, and then his other prediction of 2.2 million deaths in the US, which he said would be solved by politics, by locking everybody down and isolating everybody and having everybody just stay away from each other. It's a pure medieval approach. In fact, the New York Times actually even ran an article by their leading virus reporter called "To Fix This Virus, We Should Go Full Medieval." Yeah, that was actually the title of his article. So he's advocating, universal quarantines and that sort of thing. So the role of the media, and then I think thirdly, you do have to look to the political class. And I think there's been a change in culture. I think back in 68 and 57, we understood there's some things that politicians can do and other things they can't do. And even at the height of the Vietnam War, when we were trying to banish the world of communism and sending and drafting people and sending people abroad and coming up with Medicare and civic renewal and all these crazy programs, welfare state, warfare state. Even then, they didn't believe that the state should be unleashed to control a virus. It wasn't part of the agenda. But in the meantime, I think there's been I'm not sure about this, but I feel like there's been a change in the culture to the point that we think that the government should be absolutely held responsible for everything that happens. So if you're a governor of a state and people are dying in your state, you're suddenly afraid that everybody's going to blame you, that you're going to be held personally accountable for every death in that state. And so that caused them to just kind of freak out and lock everything down.
I think you've hit the nail on the head with those 3 points, Jeffrey Tucker, but there's something else that I do think, and maybe this is a point in fairness to government officials, that I believe is the distinction between the novel coronavirus that we're seeing right now in COVID-19 and the Asian flu of 1957 and the Hong Kong flu of 1968, and that is that you have asymptomatic carriers where you cannot tell necessarily that somebody actually has this virus, and therefore a lot of people may be sharing it around without having any clue whatsoever that they are doing so. What do you think about that particular distinction and whether or not it provides some sort of justification for more of these? Let's keep people away, even if they're not part of those demographics, because they could still be carrying this virus anyway.
Okay. Well, look, don't need to tell you that I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist, I'm not a biostatistician. But I will say this, we don't have any evidence from 1968 or 1957 that actually a lot of people were asymptomatic, and that's good. Like, the more asymptomatic cases you get, that's the better it is, because the more people that can get immunity, and then the virus burns itself out through herd immunity strategies. Now, this is relatively new knowledge for me. It's only become a result of being in this panic situation, this crisis situation, and actually listening to these guys. But again, I talked to my mother about it. And she tells you this. That whole generation knew this. So asymptomatic is not bad. It's actually good. And the vulnerable populations, we know who they are. We've known who they are for more than half a century. Older people with pre-existing conditions and so on definitely need to isolate themselves. Younger people, if they get the virus, get stronger as a result. It's like the chicken pox in the old days. We used to have parties. And it's like, these are very difficult things for us to for some reason, even to discuss right now, because it contradicts everything that we've been told for the last 6 weeks, which is stay away, stay away, stay away. That may not be the best. That may not be the best strategy. As I say, Woodstock went on. Everything went on in 57, 68, and how much of the Hong Kong flu was spread at Woodstock? Probably half the people got it, or had it and didn't know it. And some of them were down for a couple of days or whatever. And it's okay for a virus to be non-fatal. That's actually a very good thing.
Sure.
So anyway, to understand what I'm saying really requires that you have a slight change in your outlook towards everything we've been told over the last 6 weeks. And again, I'm not giving my medical opinion here.
Right.
I'm basing this based on all the many endless hours of videos I've watched from epidemiologists and serious biostatisticians, one of whom got a Nobel Prize, and even the World Health Organization is saying now that Sweden took the right route.
Well, and let's understand too that if you recognize that the role of government needs to be small, particularly in economic context, that genuinely is a demonstration that you understand some basic facts about human nature and how humans function in the sense of self-interest in making responsible decisions and trusting the people's ability to reason through things and not saying, hey, you need to look at government. So I think it makes perfect sense that from an Austrian economics perspective, as the American Institute for Economic Research comes from, that you would have that perspective. But I want to hit on 2 very quick points before we let you go, Jeffrey Tucker. And that is first Sweden. There are a lot of folks who have been sort of mocking Sweden's approach and saying, oh, it's ridiculous, you can't take it seriously, they've done it wrong, they've had more deaths than Norway, for example. What have you learned about how Sweden has handled this that may be more effective?
Well, one thing, they didn't destroy people's lives. So people are out and about. They never closed the schools. I would also include South Korea in this, by the way. I don't think it's just Sweden. For some reason, everybody wants to talk about Sweden. Nobody wants to talk about South Korea. Maybe because we somehow relate to Sweden more. I don't know. But they didn't destroy people's lives. There's no increase in suicide hotlines and drug overdoses and domestic abuse in Sweden. And the economy will go into recession, but not nearly. I mean, just like a fraction as bad as it is all over Europe and the United States as a result of the shutdowns. Sweden, the experts who consulted Sweden have expressed regret that they mishandled the nursing home situation, that they had too many people coming in and out of the nursing homes that was infecting people, and they didn't quite handle that well, and they really are sad about that. But I think that's like 40 or 50% of the deaths in Sweden came about from nursing homes, so just like in the U.S. So that wasn't handled well there. But the part that they got right was the freedom part. That's my view. And just to follow up on your point about human rights and freedom, we came up with these ideas of human rights and freedom association and so on in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance period and the age of the Enlightenment, during a time when pandemics were very common. People were sick. Lifespans were not that long. There was disease present. We still came up with the idea of human rights. And I think it's really tragic that in 2020 we're willing to throw away 500 years of history of prosperity, freedom, and human dignity just because a virus came along that we're confused by and we were arrogant enough to believe that states could control.
Well, and I would say this, that the Wall Street Journal, I think, has a good editorial in today that is all about how targeted lockdowns are better, and they point to a particular research study from the National Bureau of Economic Research by MIT economists who found, quote, interestingly, we find that semi-targeted policies that simply apply a strict lockdown on the oldest group can achieve the majority of gains from fully targeted policies. For example, a semi-targeted policy that involves the lockdown of those above 65 until a vaccine arrives can release the young and middle-aged groups back into the economy much more quickly and still achieve a much lower fatality rate in the population. I'm going to have to leave it there, but it's interesting that while this article, this particular editorial, is focusing on the idea of targeted lockdowns as opposed to no lockdowns whatsoever, it goes to your point that there are other ways to address this crisis, but we have to leave it there. Jeffrey Tucker, editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research, so great to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us and for highlighting that a pandemic was going on when Woodstock happened. I mean, who would have thought that? So,
thank you.
All right, thank you. Again, Jeffrey Tucker joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we will be joined by Max McGuire of conservative-daily.com and get his thoughts on what's happening with regards to Michael Flynn and also this story now we're learning, possibly with some support from federal government research, of the Democrats or Democrat group with former General Stanley McChrystal involved using artificial intelligence technology and social media. What? We'll be back on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I'm Jimmie Sengenberger.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I'm Donald Trump. As you know, people of America, the elections are coming up in November, and I have some very distressing news for you. Very distressing and disturbing. Did you know that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are both porch pirates? Do you know what that is? There's hundreds of hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages. Well, Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work. She has to do the dirty work just like she always does. Remember that this November when you go to vote, a Republican would never do that. He'd never take your precious little tot's choice. Never. And so think of that when you vote this November. Thank you very much. God bless and have a great day.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Do you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy? Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better? A deep need to point fingers, deflect, or deny? Uncontrollable stress, frustration, or depression? Fear of recession, fear of no recession? Then you may have PTDS, or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magatol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magatol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magatol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magatol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you're allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magatol, from the makers of Triggerol.
And now, folks, for the final segment of Jimmie at the Crossroads, let's welcome back Mr. Sang Style himself, Jimmie Sengenberger.
Rocking and rolling back on Jimmie at the Crossroads. I am Jimmie Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. Thanks so much for joining us and being a part of the program that makes sense out of nonsense, or at the very least, we do our level best to do just that. And boy, do we have some nonsense being reported, or at least potential nonsense being reported. There is something called the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Now, this is the Pentagon's secretive research arm. And there are reports now that DARPA funded an artificial intelligence-driven program that may now be being put to use by Stanley McChrystal, former general in the Obama administration. Of course, he is the retired Army general who had been in charge of the Afghan war until he was removed from the post, fired in essence by President Obama, then President Obama in 2010, for some disparaging comments he made, interestingly enough, about Trump administration or Obama administration officials, I believe including Joe Biden at the time, ironically enough. Well, now this organization that he's involved with, Defeat Disinfo, may be using this technology that DARPA purportedly created. Let's talk about that as well as the ongoing saga with Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, with Max McGuire, who is Advocacy Director at conservative-daily.com and host of the Conservative Daily podcast, who rejoins us here on Jimmie at the Crossroads. Max, my friend, welcome back. Hello. So for some reason, we're not hearing you at the moment, Max McGuire. Not sure quite what's going on there. Nathan is double checking the settings here.
Yeah, his thing is on.
Oh, Max, can you talk again? I'm not sure why we're not picking you up here. Nathan Matouche taking a look and trying to figure out what's happening. That's rather strange. Sometimes this happens on a live broadcast where you're jumping from one thing to the next. I am assuming that Max's microphone is on and that there's something odd with the situation here. We're working on it. Why don't we go ahead and do this for just a moment while we get this sorted out. We'll go out of order for the topics, and let's play cut one here while we figure out the audio issues here with Max McGuire, our guest. And this is from April 2nd when we interviewed Sidney Powell, who is General Michael Flynn's lawyer, about what went on with Michael Flynn and some of the abuses at the time. Take a look at this.
We have moved to withdraw his guilty plea on multiple grounds, not the least of which is the government's breach of the plea agreement, their bad faith and retaliatory conduct against him for the last year because he refused to lie at their demand in the Eastern District of Virginia in a case against his former business partner, and the judge in that case wound up throwing the case out. And also, his lawyers, they represented him before I came in the picture after his guilty plea, had an egregious conflict of interest. They had done the Foreign Agent Registration Act filing that the Department of Justice Mueller squad put in their sights very early on and wound up essentially serving him up to the government. The whole thing is atrocious. The government made up the case from the beginning. We only learned this December in what evidence it should have been produced to us long ago that the FBI agents sent an agent in to what was supposed to have been a presidential daily briefing on August 17th, 2016, before the election, to collect information on Flynn, to assess Flynn in case they needed to interview him later, i.e. if Donald Trump was elected president. The timeline is this. Strzok and Page text about the insurance policy on August 15. On August 16, they open the case against Flynn. And on August 17, they send this agent into the presidential daily briefing to spy on him and Trump and collect information. And then that same agent wound up interviewing him in the ambush interview at the White House on the 24th of January. On top of that, their notes don't match the 302 that they generated, their FBI report. The government says they don't have or can't find the original FBI interview report. They produced multiple drafts that show significant changes. Things were added into the report that they then alleged were false statements made by Flynn that aren't in their notes at all. General Flynn distinctly remembers telling them several things that do not wind up in the notes. And the whole case is made up. It exemplifies every single thing wrong with our judicial system.
All right, we're back here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. That was from April 2nd. We do have Max McGuire, and I think we've got the audio there. Max McGuire, Advocacy Director.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can indeed. Max
All
McGuire
right,
is Advocacy Director at conservative-daily.com and host of the Conservative Daily podcast. Technical silliness sometimes. Max, how the heck are you, my friend?
Doing good. How you doing?
You know, I'm doing not too shabby. So far, so good. So you could take your pick between the two. I mean, we just heard Sidney Powell, Michael Flynn's lawyer, describe some of the just travesty of justice for how Michael Flynn was treated. Why don't we start there instead of the DARPA, and then we'll jump into the DARPA story.
Yeah, so I've been on your radio show, and I've been on the show in the past, and what we've talked about is this principle in law known as fruit of the poisonous tree. And it's the idea that if an investigator breaks the law, or if they do something unethical, even if they are able to find evidence to use against someone, that evidence is fruit of the poisonous tree and shouldn't be admissible. So what we see in the documents that have come out with Michael Flynn is that these investigators were looking to get him fired. these notes show in the early deliberations about what they wanted to have happen, what their goal was of interrogating Flynn. Was it to remove him from his position? Was it to prosecute him or to get him fired? The Federal Bureau of Investigation is not in the business of getting administration officials fired. That shouldn't be their goal. And it shows that there's a political animus behind this, because if their goal was actually to get to the truth, then that would be what the notes would show. But what we see in their own handwriting is that these agents were talking about trying to get Michael Flynn to lie in the hopes of at least potentially getting him fired. So it's a huge black eye on the FBI, as if they already didn't have a black eye. But it really shows the problem in all of this, because that we were led to believe that this was one of the linchpins of the Russia investigation, that they were going after Flynn for legitimate things,
right,
that he pled guilty. That obviously meant he was a Russian stooge. But now we're seeing that the whole thing was a sham from the start.
Well, and not just a sham from the start, Max McGuire, but it was a sham intended to perpetuate the exact idea that you're talking about, to lend legitimacy to the Russia probe. Ironically enough, the idea that we had in mind was Michael Flynn is being caught up in a Russia probe that actually has some meat on the bones. But no, it was exactly the opposite. Michael Flynn was being used to suggest that there was meat on the bones of the Russia investigation.
Yeah, and we saw this with the Russia investigation at other points, right? The investigators leaked information to places like BuzzFeed, other articles, other journalists. Those journalists took the leaks that they got, published it, and then the FBI turned around and used those leaks to justify their own investigation. So it was a circular argument where the FBI was leaking stuff to the press and then using those leaks, presenting them to the courts as if they were evidence to support their claims. So we see this throughout the entire Russia investigation, where there isn't any evidence. So either the FBI invented evidence through that process I was just talking about, or, as we know from the fraudulent paperwork filed between FISA court, actually lying, claiming things that were not true, presenting binders of so-called evidence that included blank pages, hoping that the judges wouldn't actually flip through them and see that they were blank, hoping that they would see how thick they were and just assume that there was evidence. They actually admitted that there were blank pages included in evidentiary filings as placeholder documents in lieu of the actual evidence. I mean, the whole thing is a sham. And the fact that there are people on the left who still believe that this was legitimate shows you just how deep the Trump derangement shows you just how desperate they are to cling to this failing narrative.
Let's go to cut 3 here. President Trump was asked the other day about the possible rehiring of Michael Flynn and his view on that prospect and whether or not it's actually something that could take place.
But I'll tell you what, General Flynn was under enormous pressure, and it was an artificial pressure, because what they did to General Flynn was a disgrace. Well, it was a total disgrace. It's shocking. And I hear even more information came out today. What they tried to do to destroy him and to hurt this presidency was perhaps in our country's history, there's never been anything like it. An absolute disgrace. But I'll rely on what the vice president said. I can say this, and I think you understand this, John, very well. What happened to General Flynn should never happen again to a citizen of this country. Yes, please.
Said that Michael Flynn would come back even bigger and better. So are you going to pardon him? And if so, are you considering to bring him back into your administration?
Well, it looks to me like Michael Flynn would be exonerated based on everything I see. Look, I'm not the judge, but I have a different type of power. But I don't know that anybody would have to use that power. I think he's exonerated everything. I've never seen anything like it. What they did, what they wrote, you see this, General. You wouldn't want this happening to you, what they did to General Flynn. And it's just disgraceful. So, you know, I guess we'll get to that maybe someday or maybe not. Hopefully we won't have to get there.
Well, would you consider bringing him back into your administration?
Well, I think he's a fine man. I think it's terrible what they did to him. It's something that nobody's asked me, but you're asking me for the first time. I would certainly consider it, yeah.
I would certainly consider it. Now, I think his point, Max McGuire, about how he shouldn't have to pardon him, that Michael Flynn should be exonerated, is really the key point, that he shouldn't be getting to a point where it's the president needing to pardon him, because this is a complete miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, it was a complete miscarriage of justice. Let's remember that the reason that this whole investigation against him started was because these FBI agents were watching Michael Flynn give his briefings in the White House, talk to reporters, and they had determined that he was lying to reporters. Now, there is no requirement that the federal government, that representatives of the administration tell the whole truth to reporters. In fact, in many instances, it's advisable for them to lie to protect classified information and such. But these FBI officials saw that Flynn was not telling the truth to the media, so they tried to get him to say the same thing to them, which would be a crime because you're not allowed to lie to a federal investigator. Presumably, I guess it would probably have leaked if they got him to tell the truth. I mean, everything in those days were leaking. But it really does pose a problem because in the early days of the administration, they were trying to take advantage of all the chaos. And you had Comey admit that he probably wouldn't have gotten away with this in a more organized administration. But this has serious ramifications moving forward because if I can't imagine why any federal official, why any administration official would ever sit down and talk to the FBI if you have to even think that they're going into this interview with the intent of getting you to lie to them. Right? When you have the NSA talking to the FBI, he shouldn't have to worry about telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. These should be just government officials coordinating with each other. And that's kind of what it looks like he went into this thinking, but they were obviously interrogating him. So there's serious ramifications for the government as a whole if every federal and administration official has to think twice about what they say in like an intergovernmental meeting for fear that they might be lying in the presence of an investigator. It's really shameful how this has turned out.
No doubt. Final question on this topic. Max McGuire, again, Advocacy Director for conservative-daily.com and host of the Conservative Daily podcast. What lesson does this teach us about being wary of government authority, whether it's the FBI or otherwise? Because clearly, I mean, when you go to the FISA abuse that we have seen, that's another instance where the FBI was not completely honest, to say the least, was I think blatantly deceptive in order to get this investigation going. What lessons should we take away, and how do you think Christopher Wray, the FBI director appointed by President Trump, is doing at cleaning this up?
Well, the last question first. I don't think Ray's doing nearly a good enough job cleaning this up. He's been resistant of these kinds of files being released, so he should obviously be replaced and removed as soon as possible. With the second question of what the American people should take from this, if the federal government is willing to do this to the National Security Advisor, right? If they're willing to go after the President of the United States, they're willing to break laws, violate the Constitution, violate their own ethics rules, if they're willing to do all of this to go after these high-profile individuals, you can bet that there are people in government doing the same thing against average Americans. So what I look at all of this, and my biggest takeaway, is the libertarian argument that there is nothing you can say to a police officer that will make, or a federal investigator, that will make your life better. Right? If you are not in jail, there is nothing you can say to a federal investigator that will make you less in jail. Anything you say can and will be used against you. So I support police. I love the idea of cooperating with investigations, but as long as we have this cloud hanging over our heads, I can't see how anyone in their right mind could voluntarily answer a police officer or a federal agent's questions, knowing that it could be twisted like this and they could be thrown in jail.
Now let's shift to a different topic here, Max McGuire. There's this agency, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which apparently developed some artificial intelligence technology that may be being used by a new organization called Defeat Disinfo, spearheaded, it seems, by retired Army General Stanley McChrystal. Tell us what's going on here. What do we know and what might be the case?
So DARPA is the Pentagon branch that basically funds advanced research projects. And some of those happen to be under the Pentagon's roof. Other times they're working with private companies on a public-private partnership. So they've developed everything from like advanced cluster munitions, and they were responsible for getting us GPS, right? So there are some technologies that do find their way into the public space, like GPS, that have revolutionized our lives. The challenge is when you have technologies that are developed for a war-fighting posture, all of a sudden finding their way into the hands of political operatives. There was a technology that DARPA helped fund. It was a public program, open source program, but it had federal funding to develop it, to use artificial intelligence to combat propaganda within the Islamic State. So when the Islamic State would post things on social media, the goal was to identify what was going to go viral before it went viral, and then identify the best counter messaging to make sure that people think twice. Basically just counter messaging, counter propaganda. So that technology, as I mentioned, was open source. It was partially funded by the government. It's now being used by this group, Defeat Disinfo, against Trump supporters. And they claim that it's necessary because Trump supporters, they don't like that people are defending the president on social media. They don't like that at the top of Trump's Twitter replies are conservatives defending him. So their goal is to identify the things that are going to go viral before they do, and then identify the best way to form a message, and then to get that message into the hands of their sock puppet accounts, their influencers, social influencers, celebrities, so that everyone on their side can have a unified message to counteract what they see as propaganda. It's pretty scary because you would never expect actual like weapons that the Pentagon researches to find their way into civilian hands, but this technology is.
So I just want to clarify that Stanley McChrystal, General McChrystal, is advising this organization.
Yeah, he's advising
Disinfo. But Curtis Hoagland is the leader of it. He's social media guru, is what's described in this article from Fox News. But DARPA says this. They say, quote, Hoagland's claim DARPA funded the tech at the heart of his political work is grossly misleading. He advised briefly on ways to counter ISIS online. He was not consulted to design AI or analysis tools, nor certainly anything remotely political. DARPA is strictly apolitical. So clarify for me the role of Hoagland in this software development or this AI development with DARPA, but what we know about that, but also now he's running it. So there's a few different moving parts here.
Yeah. So I'm very skeptical to take any Pentagon press release when it comes to programs like this, because this is still ongoing technology. This is stuff that the Pentagon is using against the Islamic State, is using against foreign countries. So I would always take any press release that they give with a grain of salt, because obviously they're not going to admit that they're using this kind of technology. And what I mentioned before is that what we do know is that the Pentagon did fund this technology, and it was an open source. They were one of many funders, many backers for it. And we do know that it was put into place with these to combat propaganda from the Islamic State. So the real scary part is that it's being used now, it seems like it's about to be used against the American people. And at a time when, I mean, Jimmy, we've talked about like foreign interference in elections, right? I don't think it can get more interfering than this, than to see like an organization using this Pentagon, at least partially funded technology, to use artificial intelligence to shape the way we talk about and think about issues. I mean, one of the things that these articles that the Defeat Disinfo people were mentioning was the back and forth over whether Trump told people to ingest disinfectant. Now, we don't have to dive too deep into it, but at no point did Donald Trump ever tell anyone to ingest disinfectant. What he talked about was whether doctors could find a way to use parts of disinfectant internally, which we already do, right? Part of bleach, one of the components of bleach is hydrogen peroxide. You drink too much hydrogen peroxide, it'll kill you. It's a known disinfectant when it comes to coronavirus. But if you were to drink poison control could recommend that you take some hydrogen peroxide to induce vomiting, right? So we know that parts of disinfectant are already used internally as forms of medicine. That's what Trump was arguing. But the Defeat Disinfo people hate that Trump was able to get around some of the propaganda with that, and they want to use this technology to fight on that front, which is really scary because it's basically taking what campaigns already do, which is like focus group testing stuff, and making it instantaneous using AI, and you'll never know what is real and what isn't. It's crazy stuff.
Speaking of disinformation, Max McGuire, I wonder if Defeat Disinfo is at all concerned with, and we talked about this last week here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, with the fact that many in the media were just obsessing over the idea that there was a spike in poison control calls and that it was directly tied to President Trump's comments. And we debunked that on this show, saying this trend upward was already happening for poison control calls. And it's logical because people are at home all the time and they are using disinfectant a heck of a lot more. Disinformation right on CNN. I wonder if Defeat Disinfo, this organization McChrystal is advising, would have any interest in defeating the disinfo of CNN and others saying that sort of thing.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, we already see this when it comes to like the supported fact checkers on Facebook and YouTube. You never really see them fact checking the left. They only ever seem interested in fact checking the right. I'm very, very skeptical any claim that this technology would be used against the left or against the moderate Republicans that they call themselves. Briefly, to me, the really scary part of this is this idea that instead of crowdsourcing or focus group testing or polling what messaging campaigns should use, I'm really terrified because using artificial intelligence can basically create campaign messaging instantaneously. And we've seen, I mean, we put a video up on Conservative Daily on our Facebook page of how Joe Biden is now using teleprompters in his live interviews. You see what's going on with deep fake technology where with basic hobbyist computers, you can create videos that make it look like famous people were saying things they never said, right? We've seen this like used in Star Wars movies where they're bringing actors back from the dead to play roles that they obviously aren't available to play anymore. So when you see that technology and you see this, it's entirely possible, Jimmy, in not too long, you could see the rise of the artificial candidate. You could see the rise of AI-generated messaging using deep fake video technology to create videos that the candidate has never done, right? The candidate has never said. Look, it's really scary.
You're so right about that. And I stumbled upon one of those YouTube channels, and I heard Martin Luther King Jr., I think it was, and JFK and others talk about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Now, they pronounced it Plagueis because it was automated, but it was from a computer system having these individuals talk about things that are absolutely absurd. Like JFK was dead decades before Star Wars Episode 3 with Palpatine telling Anakin about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis.
Yeah, the dark side of the Force is a pathway that what's the line that many people call unnatural? I mean, this is what we're talking about.
To abilities that many people would consider unnatural, to be unnatural.
I mean, the one that's moving around on the internet is the Back to the Future clip using Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland.
I saw that.
And you watch it, and if you didn't know what was going on, you'd believe it. Yeah. And that's really the That's really the scary part because I mentioned the fact that Donald Trump never said ingest disinfectant. The technology is there that someone could have altered that video if they wanted to make it look like he said ingest. So we see that people like Joe Biden are already using teleprompters. That technology is there for live interviews. We're not far off from the idea of the virtual candidate videos, messaging being put out with the candidate not even being involved in it at all. It's terrifying stuff. And with this AI, it would just be a complete game changer.
Can you just tell me about the Biden thing? Like, were they coming up with lines on the fly, or because they have staged the questions, what's going on there? Like, did they pre-write it? Was it?
That's the ultimate question. So when you use a teleprompter basically you're projecting lines of text on a semi-transparent screen that's right in front of the lens of the camera. Right. So it looks like you're looking at the lens, but you're actually reading the text that's just in front of the lens. So with Joe Biden, he doesn't have the best eyesight, so they have to put it a little bit closer than they probably would have wanted. So if you watch the videos, again, we have this on Conservative Daily on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Conservative Daily. If you watch his eyes, you can see them just shifting left and right ever so slightly if you zoom in. So that's the ultimate question. Is Joe Biden being fed the questions in advance, or is there some speed typer in the background typing out what he should say? I don't know, because he's using these during supposedly live on-the-fly interviews. It's one thing to use a teleprompter when you're going to give a prepared remark. No one criticizes anyone for that. But when you're on MSNBC, when you're doing a live stream with reporters, you're not supposed to use a teleprompter. So
this
that's
isn't
the question.
Town halls. You're saying this is actually interviews.
Yeah. If you look at the video, I think it was the video with him on Al Sharpton's show. You zoom into the eyes, you can see the pupils of his eyes moving left to right, and he leans forward and he squints. It's very obvious to anyone who's used a teleprompter that he's using a teleprompter, because for one, he's a mess. He can't get a sentence out. The last couple of days, we've seen some of the best sentences that Joe Biden has ever given, right? It's very clear that he's on a teleprompter because he's not stuttering. But if you watch his eyes, you watch how he leans forward and squints and his eyes shift left and right, you can tell that he's using a teleprompter. So again, are they giving him the questions in advance? Or is there just someone who's listening in real time, typing out what he should say, feeding him statistics? We don't know, but it's clear if you watch the videos of him. his eyes are shifting left to right as he's looking at the camera. He's obviously reading something.
Wow, that's fascinating. Max McGuire, Advocacy Director at conservative-daily.com and host of the Conservative Daily podcast on all your podcast locations. Thanks so much for joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads once again. Always great to check in with you, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Max McGuire, again, with Conservative Daily, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Well, that is it for us today. Tomorrow, we've got a full lineup. We're going to have our Washington Examiner Wednesday guest, working on who that's going to be. Ken Blackwell will join us, talk about some COVID-19 topics. Charlie Katibi from Americans for Prosperity will be on to talk about telehealth and what the coronavirus crisis tells us about something we should already be working to unleash, which is telehealth opportunities for practitioners across the country and more. So be sure to tune in then tomorrow here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. My thanks to Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire, once again joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, doing a yeoman's work. We appreciate you joining us as well, and Jimmie Viles, Jeffrey Tucker, Max McGuire for being our guests today. Back tomorrow, and be sure to subscribe to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. And, by the way, may God bless America.